Hey guys, it's Cameron with Addicted Fishing and Gone Catching Guide Service. And in this particular tutorial, we're going to be showing you guys how to plunk a steelhead plug on a high turbid river. For those of you guys that are interested in fishing high water, we also do another tutorial on plunking spinning glow and bait that's on our channel. So be sure to subscribe to Addicted Fishing and check out all the great content that we've got there for you guys. So stay tuned. So this year in the Northwest, when we're filming this tutorial, the water's been super high. We've been leaving our sleds and our drift boats at home, and unfortunately we've been all watching the river gauges just for when it would just stop raining so we get a chance to go out and catch a steelhead. But to be honest with you, there's always a chance to catch a steelhead if you have visibility that's any little bit greater than about a foot, and that's plunking. So in this particular river right here, I've got about 3 foot of visibility. The water is extremely high. It's nothing close to what we're used to fishing when we're just doing our standard drifting or bobber dogging or anything like that. But those fish are still gonna wanna move. They're still gonna wanna use the high water to get themselves upriver, to get where they wanna go to spawn. And so if you can take advantage of having the high water push those fish into very dedicated travel lanes, if you can get your presentation in front of them, you've got a good opportunity to catch them. So this spot is not a location that we would normally fish. When the water is at its normal height or even low, this particular run is dead slack calm, there's no current. But of course, with an added 8 feet of water on top of it today, there is a lot of water pushing down the river. And what it's done is all the main current has been pushing to the outside here, and it's left this soft seam on the inside from a point that's a little bit upriver. Well, as a fish is moving upriver, he's not going to be out there swimming in that super fast current getting blasted by that. He's going to be running up these edges and these seam lines to find the path of least resistance. If I can keep my plug in that zone, as that fish is coming upriver, he's going to get irritated and hopefully take a shot at it. So let me run through my setup here, because this is going to be different than the traditional steelhead rod and reel that we typically use in the Northwest. First, I've got one of my salmon trolling rods, and the reason why I chose this one in particular was because it's got about a 9.5 foot length, and it's a 15 to 30 pound rod. I'm gonna be casting a pretty heavy lead to make sure that my presentation stays in that seam line and stays in that current. And so I'm not gonna wanna be using my standard, 6 to 12 pound rods or my 8 to 15 pound rods. They're not gonna handle this big lead and the heavy current. So I upgraded to one of my salmon rods. It's a little heavier. It's got nice length to where it's gonna be able to keep that line up and out, so I don't have a lot of line down in the water where it's going to drag. I want to be able to use the lightest amount of lead to keep my presentation still and where I want it, so I don't have to use something like a 20-ounce lead to do that, because it's going to be very difficult to catch a fish, and I'm going to end up snagging that lead a lot on a lot of the debris and stuff that is not traditionally underwater that's going to be underwater with the water being this high. Now I've elected for my low pro line counter reel, and the reason why I've done that is because if I cast out and I'm fishing in a particular spot and I get a strike or I get a fish, I can replicate that. I know I'm going to be out there at 35 on the line counter or 50 on the line counter, whatever that distance may be. I can replicate it, and then if I'm fishing with buddies or I've got other guys I'm along the bank with, they can replicate it too. So having a line counter is extremely important, just as important as if we were out in the Columbia or big water running lines out to 180 or whatever that larger distance could be. My line, I'm going to stick with my braided lines, 30 to 50 pound test. These thinner line diameters won't drag as much in the current, so I'm going to be able to use a lighter lead than I normally would if I was using a 30 or 40 pound monofilament. That diameter is thick, it's going to drag. Even though I'm not casting out far, it still makes quite a bit of difference. So I do something a little bit different when I'm plunking my steelhead plugs in a tributary. Just because of the debris, the rocks, the log sticks and bushes and stuff, I try to cast out my weight, let that settle in before I slide my plug down. So since I do that, my setup is actually very simplistic. I've got my braided line that runs down to a bead chain, and all I've got above it is a large bead. This happens to be an 8mm bead, but if you were to use a 10mm or a 12 with a corky, the idea is that you just want a pretty thick bead sliding up and down your line right here, and I'll get to more of that in a second. Now from the swivel to my weight, I'm gonna have a distance of about 3 feet. Since those steelhead plugs are gonna have a little bit of their diving action on their own, I don't wanna use like a 4 or a 6-inch dropper like I would if I was using like a spinning glow and bait. The plug's gonna have a dive, it's gonna have some action to it, so I need to make sure that I have it elevated off the bottom a little bit so it's moving down to where the fish is, but it's not just laying down in the dirt or getting snagged on grass or something along the bottom. So I've got about a 3 foot distance here to about a 6 to 8 ounce triangle lead. So what I'm gonna start with when it comes to attaching my steelhead plug to my main line is a very small duo snap. Now the key is that this duo snap's gap right here where the hook is smaller than that 12, 10, 8 millimeter bead that I put on the line. The reason why is this is gonna clip onto the line and slide down to that bead. If this is bigger than that bead, it's gonna slide over it and it's gonna end up sliding down to the weight or going around that swivel, and then it's gonna foul up and it's not gonna be doing what you want. So that's why we use that larger green bead as you saw just a little bit earlier. Then I've got about 3 foot of 20 to 25 pound test. The reason why I'm using that heavier line is, once again, the water is real high, the fish could be big. I don't want a fish to get way out in the current and to end up breaking off my great steelhead plug because I'm using something that's too light, especially when it's not necessary. This presentation is going to be down wiggling in front of the fish as the fish approaches it. You don't need to go, you don't need to go light. This isn't a light drift presentation where you're trying to drift a bead or a worm. So using a little heavier line there will hopefully keep those fish on your line and avoid you from losing your plug. Now, when it comes to the plug, I've got a little Maglip 3.0 here, but you can use anything here. You can use anything from a tadpole to a little Brad's Wiggler, and I'm gonna have more on that in just a minute and some different variations with the plugs that you can use to get more strikes. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end up casting this lead out, taking this clip once it's out, clipping it on the main line, locking it in place, and letting it slide down to that swivel. So once again, guys, I'm not going to cast out my weight with my plug attached because I don't want to lose that plug. You know, I don't really know what's down there. The water's high. It's not traditionally what we fish and where we fish. So I've just got my lead with my lure detached, sitting here on the bank, and I'm going to pick my spot. Now, I don't know if you guys can see this in the camera, but I've got really fast current out there at about 20 feet. About 15 feet, I've got some slow meandering current about the speed that a guy could walk. And on the inside of the bank, I've got some pretty dead current, but some pretty shallow water. So those fish are gonna travel right up in the seam line between that dead water and the super fast water, and that's where I'm gonna wanna try to throw my weight. Okay, I like my spot. My lead is settled. I actually casted it out just a little bit further and kind of drug it into where I feel like I'm gonna wanna have it sit. The weight's locked up on the bottom, and I'm gonna put the rod in the rod holder. Everything looks good. I'm gonna attach my lure now. So when I attach my lure, I'm gonna drop my rod tip, hook it on there, and sometimes it takes a little bit of practice, but you're gonna wanna like hold the rod tip real high and let the lure slide down the line until it catches the current. And then once it catches the current, the diving action of the lure is gonna pull that line the rest of the way down to where that little duo lock is resting against that bead. There she goes. Ooh, she's wiggling good. I like it. I like it. Now, if everything's going right, and depending on the type of lure you're using, you should be seeing some of that wiggle registering through the line and up to the rod. It's gonna tell you that it's working. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that lure's got a nice little wiggle and a pulse, and what it's doing is it's telling me that that lure is down there working great. Now we wait for a fish. So while I'm waiting for a strike, since they just got down here and I wanted to get a couple rods fishing, I casted out that steelhead plug without any bait on it. Now, where it's legal to do so and where it's applicable, whenever you have the opportunity to use some bait or some scent, you probably should do so. One clever way of doing so is wrapping a coon shrimp or a piece of prawn or a piece of sand shrimp or a bait of eggs actually to your plug. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you guys right now. What I've got is some of my favorite coon shrimp, some millennial coons right here. Open her up. And I'm just gonna pick, you know, any particular coon shrimp. They're all pretty. But what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna get rid of the head. So I just got the tail meat there. Next, I'm gonna break off the tip of the tail to where I just got that chunk of meat, and I'm gonna flatten it out. This isn't like a salmon wrap where I'm gonna do a big old piece of bait on there. And I'm using a pretty small plug, so my bait wrap is gonna have to match that, because if I use something that's too big, it's gonna affect the action of the plug and it's not gonna work right. So I've got a small little chunk of coon shrimp right there, and I'm just gonna add it to the middle of the plug. Now I'm not worried about centering it or making it look all pretty right now. What I am gonna do is take my stretchy thread, start it off. I'm just gonna give it a few wraps just to get it started. Once I get that wrap started, I can then kind of push it around, squish it down, make it a little more even so the plug runs a little more even. Add a few wraps, tighten it down there. As you can see, that's getting pretty square on there. And then I'm going to tie her off. There we go. So once again, using scent and using bait on your plugs is going to be extremely beneficial, especially if you're plunking plugs. Chances are the water is going to be higher, the water is going to be more turbid. You know, you want to give those steelhead a chance to key in on that bait from a long ways off. After all, these fish do smell like parts per million, right? So if you can add a little coon shrimp or a little extra enticing scent to your presentation, it's not going to hurt you. Just make sure it's applicable and legal where you're fishing. So plunking a plug for steelhead is a great option if you're going to encounter a lot of wild fish or fish that you're not going to be able to retain. The likelihood that the fish is going to be able to swallow that plug down deep versus like a spinning glow in coon shrimp or a spinning glow in sand shrimp is a lot less, and hopefully you're not going to hook the fish mortally or at least do more damage to the plug versus those smaller baits. So if you're going to encounter a lot of wild fish, I always recommend using a plug versus a spinning glow and a sand shrimp or a spinning glow and coon shrimp. Also, if you have the opportunity to, you can also adjust your hooks on those steelhead plugs to hopefully where you're not going to hook an eyeball, or you're going to hook, like I said, at a couple other spots that could be really bad, like back in the gills. By using just a single hook on the back of your steelhead plug, whether it be a Brad's Wiggler or a mag lip, that hook is hopefully going to find this corner of the mouth, and you're only going to be hooking that fish once versus having multiple hooks or treble hooks in the fish, where it could be hooked in the corner of the mouth and in the tongue, or something that's going to cause the fish to honestly have a lot of blood loss. So if you have the opportunity to fish a steelhead plug with a single hook, especially if you're going to encounter a lot of wild fish. If you guys like what you see here, always be sure to subscribe to our channel, Addicted Fishing. We've got lots of great tutorials. And also, if you want to check out what we got going on in the interwebs, be sure to check out our website at www.addicted.fishing. We've got tons of great apparel there, tons of great steelhead options there, our steelhead worms and eggs. We've got lots of good stuff on there for you guys, and we appreciate every bit of support that you guys give us. We'll see you guys on the water.